From new wave pop sensation to tireless fundraiser, he has literally changed the world. First as lead singer of the Boomtown Rats, and then with his efforts to feed the world. He brought together his friends to record the modern-day holiday classic Do They Know It's Christmas, and then he took to organizing Live Aid for famine relief in Africa. 20 years later, with his Live 8 concert, he hoped to raise awareness of issues that burden Africa, such as government debt, trade barriers, and AIDS. He has been knighted, awarded the LBJ Moral Courage Award from the Holocaust Museum Houston, and been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Hello, I'm Ernie Manouse. Coming up on Interviews, our conversation with musician and humanitarian Bob Geldof. Do you ever have days when you say, enough, I'm tired of doing this work?
Yeah, today's a good one. Long flights do that to you. The thing is, it's exceptionally boring. And there's no eureka moment. There's no point where you say, yeah, we nailed that. Because if it was to do with the straight funding of things, projects, and you go and you wish to see how they're getting on, it's so incremental, the progress, that it's only after a period of time you'll see any sort of success or progress. And then the bulk of it is political stuff, which by definition is slow to the end. And there's an urgency to all of this, and it's that frustration between the length of time that you have to get necessarily multilateral agreements and persuasion and reports and all that. It is so tiresome and dull. But the point where the girl who was at the Live Aid stage, the North Ethiopian girl, Birhan, that was, if you like, a moment of clarity for me, because you're doing all this stuff and suddenly you realise the consequence of it is this beautiful, dynamic and intellectual and creative person. And that really is a moment where you go, that's wild, if all of us hadn't have done this concert 20 years ago, then that wouldn't exist. As an exemplar of the human, you cannot think of anything more perfect. And it's that was, certainly for me and probably for other people, a moment where you can't view another individual's life as being a success, but you sort of think, oh, that's what it is, yeah, that's worth it.
I would say at this point in your life, it's probably easier because you're seeing the culmination of a lot of work coming together. But when you were a young man, when this was all just starting for you, what gave you the drive to fight it? What gave you the impetus to get involved when it was going to take so long before results actually happened?
But see, I didn't think that. And I still don't think it. I think I'm out of here in 3 months, or something.
Got bad news for you.
Yeah. I saw the BBC news footage. It was almost catered for me, I feel, in retrospect, because it was a very long newscast. It was, in my memory, it was much longer than the norm. It was certainly over 5 minutes on the main news at 6 o'clock in the evening on BBC One, the national broadcaster. And the report was brilliant. It's quite a sort of legendary report now, I think quite a famous one. And I think it was because Michael Burke, the journalist, was so angry and he just could barely speak. So when he did speak, his words were freighted with disgust. And my personal circumstances were such that I, was fairly in a low mood. It was a low period of the year. It was late October in Britain, foggy evening, lights coming on early. I just had a little baby girl. And then I see this thing, this pornography of poverty. And it was grotesque. And you must remember the time. It was the time of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and Reaganomics and, you know, greed is good, the Wall Street movie ethic. Yeah. And, you know, I didn't particularly see anything wrong with, you know, young kids making loads of money and driving Porsches and wearing, you know, red, what do they call them in America, suspenders, braces, yeah. We call them, you know, and stuff like that. But there was other stuff. And in Britain, Thatcher was, you know, in the middle of her revolution. And the country was very divided. And next minute, all of this thing comes on. Part of our arguments in Europe were that we were wallowing in this food surplus, wine lakes, butter mountains, wheat prairies, that we are paying for tax and then burning it. And suddenly you see in a continent only 8 miles from Europe, these togaed figures, 30 million, dying of starvation. And I said it the next day, and it remains true. You know, when I'm being polite, I can use the language relatively well, you know, but I'm not polite very often. I said to die of want in a world of surplus is not only intellectually absurd, it's morally repulsive. And that's the way I felt. I mean, what I felt was that I didn't sleep. That's not normal. We see how many, you know, hungry African people do we see in our lives? Thousands. I mean, it's an endless newscast. You're bored of it. There was an otherness to this that demanded an action. And frankly, I think it was the journalism, both the photographer and the journalist. I really do think that there was an absolute otherness, plus the scale of it. I mean, Michael Burke said it was biblical. And the misery was unparalleled, you know, in that part of the world. And so, you know, I just thought, well, it's not enough to give £5 and go. I thought, you know, well, all I can do is write tunes, so I'll write one. And my band wasn't having great success at that point. We had been hugely successful. So it just struck me as logical that you get all the friends that you'd met in the last 10 years in rock and roll who were having hits. It would be a hit. We'd, you know, a few weeks before Christmas, it would take a month to do it all, write it, record it, get it out. Right. 2 week sales before Christmas. £100,000 if we're lucky. Give it to Save the Children. Basta. Yeah. You know, but you know, that didn't happen.
When you wrote that, what was going through your mind? What were you thinking to accomplish with the words of the song?
John Lennon is what I was thinking. I was thinking, you know, his more boring songs are the polemical ones, which he wrote for a purpose. So you could walk down the street and protest and sing them. And they would be empirical. They would say exactly what you wanted to say. All we are saying is give peace a chance. Happy Christmas, war is over if you want it. Or, you know, the Dylan empirical songs that, you know, really formed sort of the early part of my life, which was music and politics. That's all I was interested in. I didn't do sport when I was 11 on up. And earlier Woody Guthrie, because my band, the Boomtown Rats, was called after Woody Guthrie. He was in a gang called the Boomtown Rats when he was 11. And so those were the things that were in my head. So what is it you say to alert people? What was it in essence, what was it I wanted to say? Very corny, very boldly, feed the world. That's it. Yeah. You know, why not? You know, we're burning surplus food. That's disgusting, you know. And then, like, well, okay, you know, it was for Christmas, so yeah. So I wrote in a taxi going over to my friend was sick in North London, so I wrote the words going over to his place. And I had an old Boomtown Rats tune, which the Rats had rejected. They thought it was crap. But usually when that happened, I came back 6 months later and tried it again. You know, they were probably pissed off at me or something. So, I had this tune, and the opening line had been, "It's my world, and there's no need to be afraid." So I was thinking of, geez, what songs have I got available? So I just wrote, "It's Christmas time, and there's no need to be afraid." And so that was it. You know, it was I wrote in the taxi.
Do you remember the point you realized that the song was having an impact? Do you know when you realized this is going to do more than we thought?
It was fairly early. and there were too many odd coincidences, and I really don't believe in the karmic ragtag and bobtail, you know. But this was weird. To go to my friend's house to get the taxi, I had to walk up a street in Chelsea to get to the King's Road to get a taxi, because that was the best place to get it. And while I was hanging around, I looked into this antique shop there called Antiquarius, and I saw Gary Kemp from Spandau Ballet, who were one of the big new bands of the 80s.
Right.
And I was like, I banged on the window and he was going like that at me, and I said, come here. And, you know, and I told him, and he said, yeah, you know, they'd do it. Then I bumped into Simon Le Bon from Duran Duran about 100 yards down the street, maybe less, in a cafe I go to, which is really odd, because these were the Beatles and the Stones in Britain of the 80s. And then I called up Sting, who I knew very well, still do, and the Police were one of the big 80s bands. And by the time I'd finished the taxi ride, I had my band, the Rats, the Police, Spandau Ballet, Duran Duran, and I'd called Midure from Ultravox in the North of England, where my wife was a TV rock presenter. And so by the end of that taxi ride, I had basically the 80s and a song. So, you know, very weird, because, you know, obviously in rock and roll, you're always away. You're touring, you're in other countries, you're recording in other countries, you're doing promo in other countries, you're writing in other countries. You're not in home base, very rarely.
Yeah.
So that was weird, and that I should bump into instantly. I mean, I really mean within leaving my house within 3 minutes, these people, is odd. And I knew them anyway. So that was that. And then I just thought, this is some other thing happening here. As I say, I don't believe it, but it did roll along. And there was an excitement to the idea. When I'd call the press, say, look, I want to do this, I'd be apologetic, because, as I say, my band were on the decline.
Right.
So it's so boring, a guy ringing up trying to get, you know, press. And that's like suddenly the press thing started rolling. And by the time this thing was finished, I stayed up all night for the mix. Midge produced it. And I went home to just have a shower, and then I went straight to the BBC for the early morning disc jockeys. And we just played it. And I just said, look, no, this song's probably crap, but it doesn't matter, you know. And I mean, I was fairly on fire. I said, it could be the worst song in the world. Who cares? By 20, give 19 back, you know. And the radio stations went berserk. I mean, each DJ played it 4 times on their show, one after the other, just saying, go and get this. Now, why? I mean, you know, it was just, and it was in Britain bizarre. I mean, I remember queues all up Oxford Street to go to 3 record shots, HMV, our price, that queues, and people would buy 40 and give back 39. And I'd say, it doesn't matter if you get it from someone for a present, you give another one back to them. You know, this was butcher shops, you know, you'd have Christmas, the pig, the goose, the turkey, whatever, the Band-Aid record. Fortnum and Mason's, which is the posh shop in London, closes for a day at Christmas to let the Queen go shopping. They had it all in their front window, you know, really odd. And, I mean, I was beating the drum a lot. But every factory in Europe was printing this. No record pressing plant was printing any other record. The workers worked all weekend and all night free to press it. That was their contribution, because now I was on this Band-Aid thing. Whatever it is you do, you can do it. I don't know what it is you do, and you can do it. That's your contribution. And so these guys worked all weekend, all night, just pressing this thing, and we couldn't press enough. And then Harry Belafonte called me from the States, and he said, Geldof, I'm really embarrassed that some, you know, English white kid. I said, Irish, Harry. Yeah. You know. So he called Quincy Jones and USA for Africa, which I was at. And so every country was doing this. Then I go to Africa. I'm assaulted by smells and sounds and sights that no person should ever have to see. And I realised I encounter a situation in Sudan that requires £3 million But now I've spent the money from Band-Aid going across Africa, to all the agencies. So what do we do? And I thought, well, let's unite all the different Band-Aids around the world. USA for Africa, Film Mention in Germany, Chansons Sans Frontières in France, Northern Lights in Canada. Do all them, get the money for the concert, and that'll pay for this circumstance of it. And that became a different thing, but it became Live Aid.
Wow. Was there ever a point then when all this is going on, how do you keep in check as a human being? There's got to be a sense of
Because I had a 42-day tour to do at the same time, which was going really well. But during the day I was organising this other stuff.
But is there the internal battle of, wow, I'm big now. Look at my record is doing all this. How do you keep it in check that, no,
this
is
wasn't
actually
my
doing
record
something
anyway.
more?
You have to be reminded that you wrote it. That song, I never play it in my gigs, ever. And people, if somebody shouted out, which they do occasionally, I say, nah, that's not my song. I say that, and it's not. And plus I don't like doing it, But it's what... A measure of that is that at Christmas, like here, you go around the supermarkets and you have your I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas, your rock and roll Bruce's Christmas song. You have all that going, you hear in the background. In the UK, they've got a Slade one. Well, I wish it could be. Oh, no, that's Roy Wood, but they have Slade, and then they have White Christmas. They have Bruce's one, and then on comes the Band-Aid song. And I sort of am aware that it's a bit embarrassing because people go, But that aside, the best one, and this is really cute, I think, we have the carol singers come around, and they're just, kids who haven't a clue, so they're singing, Silent Night, Holy Night, and Come All Ye Faithful, and next minute they start singing, It's Christmas Time, and they think like it's 400 years old or something like these other songs, So it's sort of, and it is weird, I'm sitting at home, they don't know it's my house,
Right.
And I hear these kids doing that song, and you kind of think, that's cool, maybe in 30 years there'll be these kids still doing it, no idea what it's about or what it's for.
That's wild.
Yeah.
But now, as I understand it, though, you were always interested. Back when you were a kid, you actually went and volunteered at homeless shelters or soup kitchens and things.
Yeah.
Where did that desire within you come from? How did you know that was something to do?
Circumstance again, I think. My mum died very young, 6 or 7. My dad sold towels around the countryside of Ireland. So we were largely on our own, myself, my 2 sisters. My eldest sister got out quick. She didn't want to be surrogate mum. She was 17. She got out and sort of lived in a flat and then got married. My middle sister was, I don't know what you call it in America, but the kid who studies the hardest in school, we call him a SWAT in England. She used to school SWAT, and she didn't want to come home, so she used to stay in school till about 8 or 9 at night studying. And so I was sort of left to my own devices, which I didn't like, of course, you get on with it, but I've obviously been asked this question a lot, so I think there's a sort of feeling that this isn't nice and it's unfair. And there was no I wasn't self-pitying. I just didn't like it. I mean, you're tiny, you're small, you come home to this big old house, it's cold, it's empty, So gradually, of course, because there was no one there, I didn't do any work at home. I started doing worse in school. And I would just listen to the radio because we didn't have TV, we didn't have a phone. And I'd listen to the radio. There's one rock and roll station in Europe at the time called Radio Luxembourg. And I read. I'd always read. And so then rock and roll properly happened. The Stones, the Beatles, the Who, Dylan. And these were young boys articulating a coming time, a different time, a rupture with the past. And that hit me at the age of 11, which is exactly the cusp moment. And the next year I saw all of those people except the Who in a cinema in Dublin. And so that was that. And they were very political. The Stones and Dylan in particular, Beatles later, but, and I've been reading. And so at 13 then, me and my friend in school, Mick Foley, started the anti-apartheid thing in South Dublin. I think I was doing it so I could get shagged, by girls because it was a great badge, you know, and you could say, yeah, we're in anti-apartheid. It was cool, you know. It didn't work, so I sort of had to start a band, I guess. But that was probably the main thing. But, you know, it was clear as day to me that because someone has got a red beard, for example, therefore they weren't allowed to vote or they weren't allowed to live in certain areas or have certain jobs was absolute palpable nonsense, because you had a weird hairstyle, because, you know, you had green eyes, because you had black skin, you weren't allowed to live there or have that job or vote. You know, it just was such a laughable nonsense. You know, it wasn't as if I was enraged, it was just stupid. So that was mainly it. And I never thought it was going to be a big thing, a big struggle, the anti-apartheid. I thought it would just, that'll never work. And then at 15, out of boredom, because I wasn't doing homework, you know, I'd go home and there was no one to make me do work. I started going into central Dublin and working with a crowd called the Simon community, who weren't religious. I don't know what the name meant, but... and they were really just looking after the hookers, homeless, schizophrenics, you had the bag ladies and that. And because there was no divorce in Ireland, men who'd lost their families and just gone to bits. And we'd have a big fire in Smithfield Market, and the old drunks would come and sit around that. And we'd collect groceries from the shops before they closed, free groceries from the shop owners. And when the bakers started baking for the next morning bread, we'd collect loaves from them for free. And we'd just make soup. And we'd, you know, fill up our thermoses and we'd go around to where we knew they were sleeping and stuff like that. I just found that more interesting. Of course it is. I found them interesting, the people. You know, I was in a Studs Terkel book, you know, and things like that. That's what it felt like. And I remember one old lady, Mary, I used to visit. How's you going, Bob? I said, great, Mary, you know, how are you? It's grand, I'm very comfortable now. And she was living in a porch of a guy's house. I mean, you know, literally, that was where she lived. She had her smelly old bags and her sleeping bag and her scarf up here, and I'd sit with her and she'd have her soup. And I used to go away filled with this sort of adolescent rage with the scum who lived in the house. You know, how could he every night come home, step over this woman and shut the door? You know? And of course, much later I realised, hello, this guy let her live in his porch, you know. Yeah. Is he mad? You know, what were the neighbours going to say? You know, this smelly lady like there, you know, and there she'd come and she'd sit for the night and you'd say, good evening, Mary, how are you? Step over, say good night now and shut the door. You know, I had it sort of wrong, perversely wrong sort of thing, which I think was extraordinary. You know, I mean, you can imagine if somebody now came to the porch, police, you know, there's this mad old lady.
She's living on my porch.
Yeah. So I like that, you know.
To jump way ahead to what's going on today in the world, and you look at all the work that you've been doing and all the years you've been doing it, and you look at the trouble that's still out there.
Yeah.
How do you come to peace with it? How do you look at it and say, that's mankind's way of doing things, we have to try and change it, but this is the nature of the beast? Or how do you understand where we're at today?
It is the nature of the beast, but it's the nature of the beast is alterable. And you know, it's not as if it's, oh my God, like this will never end. It will end because there's an empirical set of circumstances that lead to extreme poverty. It isn't an accident, it's an aberration, particularly in the interconnected global economy. What's really weird is that Africa has fallen outside the net of that. I mean, 4 years ago, China was a net recipient of foreign aid. This year, it will pull 1% of its population out of poverty. 1% of China? I mean, this is huge figures. But the only constant unique in its seemingly inexorable economic decline is the continent of Africa. And there must be reasons for that. There must be reasons for that. And I asked Blair to analyse those reasons. I asked him to, why? The beginning of the 21st century, shouldn't we ask why? Why continually the humanitarian disasters, those that aren't active natures like the tsunami, the ones that seem to be caused by our malignant hand, all take place there. Why? There has to be a why. And so, fairly bravely, I think, politically, because there's no upside to this, he did the Commission for Africa, which I was on. And that was the philosophical and political agenda going forward into the G8, Britain's G8 last year. And that's why we had to do the one campaign, why we had to do Make Poverty History, which is the one campaign elsewhere. And the pointy political end of that was the Live Aid concert, which rallied all of these campaigns into a political point driving into the G8, who then, in effect, committed themselves to the recommendations of the Commission for Africa. The theory is that there's a sort of trinity, an unholy trinity upon which poverty totters. It's the question of debt from the poorest to the richest, aid to help those prime pump their economies, and the imbalanced trade regime of the world, which the World Trade Talks are trying to address now, but which they're failing at, and they will fail. So that's it. And then the Africans are the fourth component, and that's called governance. You call it corruption. It's to do with the ability to govern under the law, and that law must be applied, because otherwise you can't build economies, and therefore you can't have hospitals, and therefore you can't have schools, and therefore you have no future. Yeah. So that's kind of it. And you can have arguments of the right, and you can have arguments of the left, both valid, but they have to deal with those central issues. And that's what we tried to address properly and seriously for the first time last year, partially successfully. And, we must continue doing it. Now, how interesting can that be? Not very much.
Well, you know what? We're out of time already. So, in a one-word answer, will we see this come to an end?
Yes, we will.
And there's your one word. Bob Geldof, thank you very much.
To order a transcript, call 866-652-3378 or send $6.95 to the address on your screen. Please include the name of the guest.